Trauma Chat with L&L takes the complexity of trauma and makes it bite-sized.
Our goal is not to minimize it, but to normalize having the conversations about the experiences that many of us have had without always knowing how to cope.
Trauma recovery is possible. Healing from past hurts or even recent hurts is possible.
And we're both trauma therapists, so let's talk about it. I'm Leticia Fonrose, a therapist, speaker, author, and owner of Holistic Quest Wellness. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and certified EFT practitioner, which stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. And I specialize in supporting individuals and communities by discovering tools, strategies, and insights to have a better relationship with their thoughts and feelings so that they feel more control in their lives.
And I'm Leticia Vaca Williams, a therapist, speaker, and owner of Urban Health Group, Inc. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm certified in brain spotting, certified in EMDR, and I'm an experienced medical social worker. Urban Health Group is a boutique-style concierge for healthcare navigation and mental health support. Our ultimate goal is to empower Black, Indigenous people of color with tools and supports to effectively navigate their health and mental health needs for better wellness. So we are talking about trauma. It is a hot topic all over social media, and we thought it is about time that some actual trauma therapists join the chat. So we're going to be talking about why it's important to have some professionals talking about trauma and the complexities of it. It is not just a term, but it is a whole experience that can really be disruptive to a lot of folks' lives. So let's talk about it.
And I think, like you said, like in social media, a lot of people are throwing this word around without real context behind this word, like what it looks like, what it means, how it shows up in your day-to-day life, how it affects your life, all of these things, right? So this is kind of the platform that we want to provide for you guys to provide some real psychoeducation, some facts, busting myths, all of those good things.
Yeah. Because it's not just a word, it is loaded. It looks so different from person to person. And in my own practice, surprisingly, people come in for other things, and we discover there's a history of maybe some childhood stuff that was really overwhelming and traumatic that impacts their relationships as an adult. So like I see folks come in with work-related stress or relationship issues that have been really hard to resolve on their own. And when we do some digging, there's like more there. And with social media, we see these bite-sized clips that sometimes can be applicable, but a lot of times are being overused or misused. So we want to make sure that people really understand what it can look like, what it can feel like, how can we identify it within ourselves, our families, our friend groups, so that people actually get, appropriate level of support.
Yes. And I love what you said around like people entering the space thinking it's one thing. And then as you do the work and unpack, it's something completely different, right? Like peeling back the layer of those onions. And I heard this saying, I want to say it was Dr. Ken Hardy, who said, if it's hysterical, it's historical. Right. So sometimes you might be feeling like you are attacked in the workplace, and that might be true. Yeah. I'm not negating that. But if that is a constant experience throughout every area of your life, there might be some deeper rooted issues rooted in trauma that could be affecting your day-to-day stressors.
Yeah, especially if you've been in different departments, if you've been at completely different companies and you're finding this common experience, it's an opportunity for us to see, well, what's going on with you? You're not wrong. You're not so far off, but it looks like a nerve that continues to get hit. And there's literally, our whole body is made up of a bunch of nerves, actual nerves. And when people, we use it in a very figurative way. Oh, that must have hit a nerve, or that touched a nerve. Literally, trauma is encoded in our nervous system. And sometimes it is tapping a part that is really sensitive, that needs attention, that needs support, rather than saying, let's dance around it, or let me avoid certain circumstances so that nerve is not activated. Or and this may be, you know, you can't avoid certain people at work, or you can't avoid the people necessarily who live in your house. So, you know, when we look at, if you're being deeply impacted that way, you may need some support so that you can just live in your day to day.
And I love that you talked about the nervous system, and you know, people do use that word nerve a lot, like, oh, such and such is getting on my nerves, or all of these things, right? And it is encoded in our nervous system. And sometimes people operate in a fight or flight, meaning like a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwhelm, or even like a freeze state where it's just like you're feeling so fatigued and you think that that's normal.
Right.
And that is a way of life, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And normal, you know, that word too can be a little tricky. And so we look at what's normal versus what's familiar, or what's healthy versus what's familiar. And with trauma, sometimes we normalize abnormal circumstances because it's familiar. Well, I know if I say this, they're going to react to that, right? So you may notice that you're more careful, or you're more vigilant. You know, that's the word we would use in therapy. You're walking on eggshells around certain people so it doesn't cause a bigger reaction from other people. Well, if you're in a frequent state of on eggshells, that can be really unnerving, right? That can be really uncomfortable for you. And so we look at what's happening in your day-to-day life that actually feels uncomfortable, that I've normalized. You know, I've learned to tolerate a certain level of unhealthiness or toxicity. You know, that's a word that folks use. That's toxic, which is good because it's not so far off. Like toxic stress can be a trauma response to things that have been going on for a very long time in your life.
Yes, exactly. And even on the opposite end of that, I hear you saying like people are worried about walking on eggshells and being very vigilant. Sometimes people will self-sabotage because that is safe, right? Like it's not safe to be in a healthy relationship because I don't know what that looks like. So it's easier to operate in what I'm used to operating in, even though it's not in alignment with what I'm trying to achieve in my life.
Yes.
Right. So that's another end of the spectrum where once you reach a certain level of safety, like, is it even safe to feel safe or comfortable or content or have joy? Like those feelings sometimes don't even feel safe. So, and we'll
It's
get
like
into
if you
that
lived
later
in
on.
a city, you're used to hearing car sounds, and then you go to the country where it's like, I don't hear anything. Like this can be scary. You know, on a lighter note, that kind of shift is what people who are moving towards like healthier connections may be fearful because it's new. So sometimes with trauma reactions and responses to something terrible that has happened in your life that you did not get support around, we're seeing all the effects of it. So we want to talk about it because we see these clips and we identify with them, right? People are liking the post, they're resharing the post, but are you getting support? You know, it's one thing to be able to name it and identify it. It's actually another thing to address it, to work on it, to no longer be disturbed, or my nerves not be that sensitive to people's comments or how they try to treat me, right? What we tolerate as acceptable behavior, when you heal, you may decide, oh, I'm not having that.
There's room for boundaries.
Yeah.
For sure with the work.
What would you say are some things that are troublesome when you hear people like quoting things that they see on social media?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm always curious on like where is the source coming from? Like who did you hear this from? Because a lot of people who are probably have a gift of service, a gift of giving, might operate therapeutically,
Okay.
right? But they might not be therapists. So that can be concerning, like, okay, how are you processing this information? And then there are small pieces of information where, like, everything is a spectrum. So I can identify what kinds of anxiety or kinds of trauma, but not have like an actual clinical need for that.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will self-diagnose, like, oh, I'm OCD, or that person's bipolar based off something they've seen on social media. And there's not enough context to that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
What I see too is a couple folks come in and they start, well, I'm a highly sensitive person and all these things are fine. But I find that like on social media, there's people who will rebrand a word when really it's like, well, you probably have PTSD. It's probably something that occurred and your nervous system is really overactive, right? When we look at, oh, I'm an empathetic person. And so we look at, okay, what do you understand about empathy and this experience? How does it apply? So I'm not the judge. I'm not the person who can say you're right or wrong, but I get curious when people use words that may not be applicable or
Yeah.
kind of exaggerate it, right?
Right.
We do like to, when we're trying to put extra on it, right? We may, and I do it too in layman's terms, or if I'm like feeling, I would use that. But when people come into the therapy office using these really charged words that would warrant attention, right? If you say, I've been traumatized, well, I'm curious, well, what happened? How did that impact you? If you had a big response that really upset me, that doesn't necessarily mean you're traumatized, but you might be. So your therapist can help you understand the spectrum of what is it like to be like really bothered and then actually I can't sleep and I'm having flashbacks and I can't be in another relationship and I'm afraid to I got to check my doors every night and I don't go out past 9 p.m. and I don't drive, right?
And nobody cares about me and all of these things. Yeah, I hear you 100%. And I think as therapists or just people in general, we try to be strength-based, which is really dope. I think it's really powerful to be strength-based, but also sometimes with that lens, we are minimizing what is real and what deserves attention. So, saying you're highly sensitive, that might be a euphemism or a strength-based approach to trauma, but also, I mean, I can't speak to the medical perspective, but probably you can, but I don't hear a strength-based word for diabetes or cancer or anything like that. We just call it what it is and we treat it, right?
Yeah.
So why is it different for mental health where we try to, change the language when it's something that is serious and deserves attention?
Yeah, so that's kind of the pitfall or dangers of so many remixes, revamps, because if what I've seen is that if people use a term, even sometimes a diagnosis, I've had some clients who really identify with their diagnosis and they don't necessarily subscribe to the fact that they can improve or that this issue can no longer be an issue. That it gives them a source of comfort that my lived experience warrants this diagnosis. And we look at, well, what happens when you heal from it? So when we use words do have power. What power are we giving? I'm an empathetic person. Does that mean you'll always be, potentially in situations where people take advantage of you? And if people identify that, are you a target? Because sometimes folks feel that because I'm empathetic, they took advantage of that. So we look at the relationship to the word and the power that we give it or that society gives it.
Listen, we just unpacked lots of good stuff.
Please note this is not a replacement for therapy, but we do encourage you to use Trauma Chat with L&L podcast as a part of your wellness plan.
Because we want you to have the knowledge you need to take the next steps.
And if any of this resonates with you and you'd like to discover how to move from surviving to thriving, please go to my website at urbanhealthgroupinc.org.
and or my website, holisticquestwellness.co, to connect with a licensed therapist where we provide a variety of mental health services.
Our links are listed below. We'll see you next Monday.